Esteemly, here's a fully expanded, natural flowing 1500-word version of key point once for your speech. Esteem. One of the things that surprises people most when they start learning about narcissists is just how subtle their tactics can be. It's rarely dramatic at first. They don't storm in yelling, esteem. I am going to control you! That would be too obvious, and most people wouldn't fall for it. No, the genius of their manipulation, if you want to call it that, esteem, is that it comes wrapped in a package that looks normal, even caring, sometimes even helpful. And the phrase I'm talking about today, the one that signals, if you hear this, run, sounds like that. Innocent, harmless, reasonable. And that's exactly why it works. People often tell me, but it didn't feel like manipulation at the time. And that's the point, esteem. Narcissists have spent years, sometimes decades, honing the art of saying something that seems benign or even affectionate, but underneath is a hidden agenda. It's a phrase that, esteem, if you respond the way you normally would in a healthy relationship, subtly erodes your boundaries, reshapes your reality, and begins to establish control over your thoughts and your choices. Esteem. It's a phrase that gets under your skin, not because of what it says on the surface, but because of what it does to your sense of yourself when you hear it. Think about it, esteem. Have you ever been in a situation where someone said something, and immediately afterward, you questioned your own perception? You doubted your reaction, your memory, or even your feelings, esteem. That's not a coincidence. That's the power of this phrase. It's engineered to make you pause, to make you hesitate, and ultimately, to make you question your own judgment, esteem. It doesn't need to be repeated constantly at first. One well-timed delivery can be enough to plant a seed of self-doubt, which, in narcissist terms, is fertile ground for long-term control, esteem. Now, you might be wondering, what does this phrase actually look like? It's the sort of thing that, if you say it out loud to a friend, they might nod and say, yeah, esteem, that's reasonable. For example, it might be something along the lines of, you're just overreacting, or I'm only joking, can't you take a joke? Or perhaps even more dangerously, esteem, I'm only doing this because I care about you. On the surface, it seems harmless or even loving, but it carries a hidden message. It's saying, your feelings are invalid, esteem. Your perception is wrong. I get to define what's real, and you should trust me instead of yourself. That's the hook. That's the subtle coercion. And here's the thing, esteem. Most people don't notice it because they want to give people the benefit of the doubt. We want to believe that someone wouldn't intentionally undermine us, esteem. So we reinterpret the phrase as friendly or helpful. And that reinterpretation is exactly what the narcissist is counting on, esteem. What makes this particularly insidious is that it often comes wrapped in a tone that feels supportive. The narcissist is rarely shouting or threatening at this stage, esteem. They might even be smiling or speaking softly, as if they're trying to help you see something you can't see yourself. That tone, the combination of words and delivery, is critical, esteem. It disarms your defenses. It tells you, I'm on your side, I'm guiding you, I'm helping you, all while slowly shifting the balance of power in their favor, esteem. And if you're a naturally empathetic person, someone who values harmony or wants to maintain connection, you may unconsciously comply without even realizing it. You might nod, laugh it off, esteem, apologize, or try to adjust your behavior. And in that moment, the narcissist has scored a tiny victory, a victory that accumulates over time, esteem. It's important to understand why this phrase is so effective. Narcissists are expert observers of human behavior. They study people, often unconsciously, to figure out what makes them tick, esteem, what makes them doubt themselves, and what makes them pliable. When they use this phrase, they're not just speaking randomly. They're leveraging what they know about you, your history, esteem, your insecurities, your values, to make the phrase hit just the right way. That's why two people could hear the exact same words from a narcissist and have completely different reactions, esteem. One might shrug it off, while the other feels a sinking weight in their chest and starts to second-guess their own judgment. The difference isn't the words themselves, esteem. It's the internal response they trigger, and the narcissist is very good at engineering that response. Here's another thing to keep in mind: this phrase rarely stands alone, esteem. It's part of a larger pattern of behavior designed to destabilize your sense of reality. One phrase might not seem like much in isolation, but when it's repeated, esteem, when it's paired with other subtle tactics like gaslighting, love bombing, or intermittent praise, it becomes part of a carefully constructed ecosystem of control, esteem. And that's what makes it so dangerous. If you don't recognize it early, it's easy to underestimate its impact. You might think, oh, that's just a quirky thing they say, or esteem, maybe I am overreacting. But over time, those little seeds of doubt grow, and before you know it, you're questioning everything you thought was true about yourself and the relationship. Now, esteem. I want you to imagine for a moment how it feels to realize this, how it feels to identify that phrase for what it really is. There's often an initial shock, maybe even a sense of disbelief. Esteem, you might feel, could it really be that simple? One phrase could hold so much power over me. And the answer is yes, that's the scary truth. Narcissists thrive on simplicity, esteem. They don't need to scream, threaten, or use violence. One deceptively innocent phrase delivered at the right moment is often enough to gain compliance, control emotions, and shape behavior, esteem. And that's why recognizing it is so crucial. Awareness is the first step in reclaiming your autonomy. Once you see it clearly, you can respond differently, you can disengage, esteem. You can protect yourself, you can run. And here's something else to remember, it's not your fault if you didn't see it at first. Narcissists are cunning, esteem. And most people aren't trained to detect subtle manipulation. We're taught to assume good intentions, to trust what people say, and to give them the benefit of the doubt, esteem. Those are all strengths in healthy relationships, but they become vulnerabilities when you're dealing with someone who's skilled at deception. Understanding that doesn't make you weak, esteem. It makes you smarter. It gives you the power to recognize danger signals before they escalate. And that's why I emphasize this point so strongly if you hear it, run. Not confront, esteem. Not negotiate, not justify, run. Because the moment you engage on their terms, you've already stepped into their game. Let me be clear, running doesn't always mean physically leaving, esteem. Sometimes it means creating mental and emotional space. Sometimes it means pausing the conversation, setting boundaries, or refusing to internalize their message, esteem. Sometimes it means walking away entirely. But the core principle is the same. Once you recognize this phrase for what it is, don't underestimate it, don't downplay it, esteem. Don't let it lodge in your mind and take root. Your clarity, your emotional safety, your sense of self, that's what's at stake. And finally, esteem. The reason this key point is so foundational is that it sets the stage for everything that follows. Because if you don't see the danger in the phrase, esteem, you won't understand how it triggers self-doubt. You won't see how it establishes control. You won't understand why empathetic people are especially vulnerable, esteem, and you won't recognize the long-term impact if it's ignored. Awareness is the seed of empowerment, and it begins here with identifying that deceptively simple, seemingly innocent phrase. So, esteem. The take-home message for this part of the conversation is simple: trust your instincts. Pay attention to how you feel when someone says something that makes you pause or question yourself, esteem. Listen to that little voice inside that whispers, "This doesn't feel right." That voice is your internal compass, and it's usually right. And when that phrase shows up, don't rationalize it, esteem. Don't excuse it, don't try to reinterpret it. Recognize it for what it is, acknowledge its potential danger, and act accordingly. Because in the world of narcissistic manipulation, esteem, awareness isn't just power, it's survival. Run mentally, run emotionally, run physically if you must. The sooner you recognize the phrase and respond with clarity, esteem, the sooner you reclaim control over your own reality. The phrase itself is small, almost invisible, but the consequences of ignoring it can be enormous. So listen carefully, trust yourself, esteem, and remember, one phrase can signal a lifetime of control, or it can signal the moment you decide to protect yourself. Choose the latter. If you want, esteem, I can continue and expand key point 2 in the same style, making the whole speech flow naturally from recognition to coping to empowerment, ready for a full motivational delivery. Esteem, this will set up your complete 30-minute speech in Dr. Ramani style. Do you want me to do that next? Absolutely! Here's a fully expanded, esteem, natural, flowing 1,500-word version of key point 2 for your speech. Once that phrase lands, when you hear it, that deceptively simple, seemingly harmless thing, esteem, it does something profound inside of you. And this is where most people don't realize the real power of narcissistic manipulation. The damage isn't just in the words themselves, esteem, it's in what they trigger: self-doubt, second-guessing, hesitation, and a quiet, creeping silence that starts to take over. That's what I want to explore right now, esteem. Because understanding this process is crucial if you want to stop giving away your power. Imagine for a moment that you've just heard the phrase. Maybe it's something like, esteem, you're being too sensitive, or I'm only joking, can't you take a joke? At first, you might laugh it off, shrug, or even smile, thinking, maybe I am overreacting, esteem. Maybe I need to calm down. That's exactly the reaction the narcissist is hoping for. They don't need you to argue. They don't need you to protest, esteem. They just need you to pause and question yourself. That tiny moment of doubt, that hesitation, is the doorway to control. It's subtle, but it's incredibly effective. You see, esteem. The narcissist doesn't just want to dominate you externally, they want to dominate you internally. They want you to start policing your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own instincts, esteem. And this phrase is the trigger. It's a tool that, once deployed, puts you in a constant state of self-surveillance. You start replaying the interaction in your head over and over, esteem, asking yourself, did I really overact? Was I too sensitive? Am I imagining things? And while you're stuck in that loop, the narcissist has already moved on, esteem. They don't have to say another word. Their control is working quietly, almost invisibly, in your mind. This is where the silence comes in. Once that seed of doubt is planted, esteem, people often stop speaking their truth. They stop asserting themselves. They stop expressing their feelings openly. Why? Because now there's fear, not fear of the narcissist as a person, esteem, but fear of being wrong, fear of being judged, fear of being seen as too sensitive, too emotional, too irrational. And the narcissist knows this. They understand that the quieter you are, esteem, the easier it is to shape your behavior. That's the brilliance of this manipulation. It's invisible, silent, and devastatingly effective. And let's be honest, esteem, this is one of the hardest parts for people to admit. Nobody wants to acknowledge that their thoughts or feelings can be hijacked so easily. It feels embarrassing. It feels like a weakness, esteem, but it's not. It's normal human psychology. We're wired to seek validation, to seek connection, and to avoid conflict. Narcissists exploit these instincts, esteem. That's why this phrase is so effective. It doesn't scream at you or bully you. It whispers, and it makes you question yourself. That whisper is louder than any shout, esteem, because it comes from inside your own mind. What's really fascinating and tragic is how quickly this internalization can happen. You might not even notice it at first. A day passes, esteem, a week passes, and suddenly you realize that your reactions are being filtered through the narcissist's lens. You're walking on eggshells, thinking, if I say this, esteem, they'll think I'm overreacting. Or, if I feel this way, it means I'm being dramatic. And the narcissist, they're smiling, nodding, pretending they have no idea what just happened. Esteem. That's the control. That's the quiet victory. Here's the thing, this doesn't just affect how you interact with the narcissist. It spills over into other parts of your life. Esteem. You start questioning yourself at work, with friends, in other relationships. You second guess your decisions, your instincts, your own judgment. Esteem. That's why narcissistic manipulation is so dangerous. It's not just about the momentary interaction, it's about shaping your internal world so that you're constantly uncertain, esteem, constantly hesitant, constantly policing yourself. The narcissist doesn't have to say much. They've already won the war inside your mind. Now, you might be thinking, surely I can fight back, esteem. I can argue, I can defend myself. And sometimes you can, but the more empathetic you are, the trickier it gets. People who are naturally thoughtful, who value harmony, esteem, who want to maintain connection, often suppress their reactions rather than confront the narcissist. Why? Because confrontation feels risky, esteem. Because standing up for yourself might trigger a fight or provoke conflict. And narcissists know this. They've counted on it for years. They've designed these phrases to land just right, esteem, knowing that the empathetic person will internalize rather than retaliate. That's why recognizing the internal effect of this phrase is so crucial. You can't just focus on what's said, esteem. You have to pay attention to what happens inside you. How do you feel in your body? Do you feel tension, anxiety, hesitation, or guilt that doesn't belong to you, esteem? Do you start doubting your memory, your perception, or your intentions? That's your internal alarm system going off, esteem. That's the signal that the narcissist has successfully triggered the self-doubt they need to control you. And it's not a sign of weakness, esteem. It's a sign that you're human and that you need to take your boundaries seriously. Let's talk about why silence is such a powerful weapon in this dynamic. When you stop speaking your truth, esteem, when you stop asserting your feelings, the narcissist doesn't have to do much. They're winning without lifting a finger. Every time you stay quiet, you reinforce their control, esteem. Every time you question yourself instead of calling out the manipulation, you give them power. And the worst part, you might not even realize it's happening. You might rationalize it, esteem, telling yourself, maybe I'm just too sensitive, or maybe I'm reading too much into it. And while you're rationalizing, the narcissist is quietly shaping the rules of your reality, esteem. This is why it's so important to break the cycle early. Recognizing the moment the phrase is used, noticing the internal self-doubt it triggers, and refusing to internalize it is critical, esteem. You have to mentally step back, separate your feelings from their narrative, and remind yourself my perception is valid, my feelings are valid, my reality is real. That internal boundary, esteem, your mental and emotional integrity, is the first line of defense. If you allow the narcissist to invade that space, you risk losing yourself piece by piece. And yes, esteem, it can feel uncomfortable, even scary, to assert that boundary, because narcissists are skilled at pushing, testing, and provoking reactions. But here's the truth, esteem. Discomfort is a small price to pay for reclaiming your autonomy. It's a signal that you're moving from a state of unconscious compliance into conscious awareness, esteem. And that's where real power lies, not in confrontation for its own sake, but in knowing exactly what's happening, why it's happening, and refusing to let it take root inside you, esteem. Empathy is your strength, but awareness is your armor. Understanding that this phrase is designed to trigger self-doubt, to shut down your voice, to silence your instincts, esteem. That understanding allows you to step back and respond intentionally rather than react unconsciously. You can maintain clarity, you can maintain your truth, esteem, and you can maintain your emotional stability. And once you do that, the narcissist's power over you diminishes dramatically because their control depends on your internal compliance, esteem. Let's not forget that this internalization can be subtle, almost invisible at first, but over time it accumulates. A single phrase may not seem significant, but repeated over months or years, esteem. It reshapes the way you perceive yourself, the world, and the relationship. You start to lose trust in your own judgment. You second-guess decisions you once made confidently, esteem. You hesitate to express opinions or feelings, fearing invalidation or ridicule. And when that happens, the narcissist doesn't have to act aggressively, esteem. They've already rewired your internal landscape to align with their narrative. But there is hope. Awareness is the antidote. Recognizing that the phrase is a trigger, esteem. Noticing how it affects your thoughts and feelings, and consciously choosing not to internalize it is powerful. You don't need to justify it, explain it, or argue about it, esteem. You simply observe it, acknowledge the impact, and reclaim your mental space. That moment of awareness is the turning point, esteem. It's where you stop being the passive recipient of manipulation and start being the active protector of your own mind. So when you hear the phrase, pay attention. Watch how your mind reacts, esteem. Notice any creeping self-doubt, hesitation, or silence. That's your signal to step back, to pause, and to reinforce your boundaries internally. Because the moment you respond consciously, esteem, with clarity and self-awareness, you take away the power the narcissist has been trying to claim. That's when you regain control, not through confrontation, not through argument, esteem, but through unwavering internal recognition of your own reality. And here's the closing truth about this point: the phrase may seem small, almost trivial, esteem, but its effect is profound because it works in the hidden spaces of your mind, in the quiet places where self-doubt takes root. The key is not to let it. The key is awareness, clarity, esteem, and the courage to maintain your truth, no matter how subtle the manipulation. Once you do that, the narcissist loses the very thing they crave: your internal compliance. Esteem. Silence may feel safe, hesitation may feel natural, self-doubt may feel inevitable, but none of it is your fault, and none of it has to define your response. Awareness is your power, esteem, and action, not reaction, is your freedom. The moment you recognize the manipulation, the moment you notice the self-doubt, that's the moment you step out of the control dynamic. And that, esteem, my friends, is how you reclaim your voice, your mind, and your peace. If you want, I can now expand key point 3 in the same style, esteem. Continuing the flow from the internal self-doubt to understanding the control mechanisms behind the narcissist's behavior. This will build the speech into a full, seamless motivational talk. Do you want me to do that next? Absolutely. Here's a fully expanded, natural, flowing 1,500-word version of key point 3s for your speech. Now, esteem. Let's take a step deeper into what's happening when you hear that phrase and feel yourself start to doubt, hesitate, or even stay silent, esteem. Because the words themselves are only part of the story. The real work, the real danger, lies in the control mechanism hidden inside those words, esteem. That's where narcissists are incredibly strategic. They don't just throw a phrase out into the void and hope for the best. Every word, every tone, esteem. Every pause is calculated to establish dominance and position themselves as the authority in your relationship. And the scary part is that they do it so subtly, esteem. You often don't even realize it's happening until you're well into the pattern. Think about it when someone says, "You're overreacting," or "esteem, you're too sensitive." They're not just dismissing your feelings, they're quietly rewriting reality, esteem. They are sending the message that your perception of the world is wrong and theirs is correct. And here's the clever part: because most of us want to believe in fairness and logic, esteem, we often default to thinking, maybe they're right, maybe I am overreacting. In that moment, the narcissist is not just controlling the conversation, esteem, they're controlling your internal reality. They're positioning themselves as the arbiter of truth, and that's incredibly powerful, esteem. This mechanism works because narcissists understand a key psychological principle: control doesn't require force, it requires influence over perception, esteem. If they can shape the way you perceive yourself, your decisions, and even your emotions, They can manipulate your actions without ever needing to raise their voice, threaten you, esteem, or use overt aggression. The phrase becomes a lever. It's a quiet, invisible force that tilts your sense of reality in their favor. And once that tilt starts, it compounds over time, esteem, creating a foundation for long-term control. Here's where it gets even more subtle. The narcissist doesn't just want you to doubt yourself, they want you to doubt yourself in their favor, esteem. In other words, they're not just invalidating you, they're rewriting the rules so that they are always right, and you are always the one who needs to adjust, esteem. That's why the phrase often carries a tone of rationality, logic, or even care. I'm only saying this because I love you, or esteem. I'm just trying to help you see it clearly, are classic examples. On the surface, it sounds reasonable, even helpful. But beneath that surface, there's a hidden agenda, esteem. Establishing the narcissist as the authority and you as the subordinate, someone who needs to trust them over yourself. And this is where the brilliance of their strategy becomes clear, esteem. They don't attack your character outright, they attack your perception. They make you question what you feel, what you remember, and even what you believe, esteem. This is why so many people describe relationships with narcissists as disorienting, confusing, or gaslighting experiences. It's not that the words themselves are abusive, esteem. It's that they're embedded in a control structure designed to make you defer to the narcissist's version of reality over your own. And once that control is established, esteem, it's reinforced in countless subtle ways, the way they frame events, the way they respond to questions, even the way they use silence or body language to signal dominance. Esteem. Let's pause and consider how pervasive this can become. The narcissist doesn't have to shout or berate to maintain control. They simply deploy their phrases strategically, esteem, creating a mental hierarchy where their interpretation is always prioritized over yours. And what's insidious is that because they often pair this with intermittent validation or charm, esteem, the contrast makes the control even more effective. Esteem. You're constantly being reminded that you could be wrong, while occasionally being right, in a way that keeps you off balance and continually seeking their approval. Esteem. This unpredictability strengthens their hold because it creates a subtle sense of dependence. You start to think, maybe if I adjust, maybe if I try harder, esteem. Maybe if I interpret things the way they do, I can get it right. And that dependence is precisely what they're cultivating. Now, why does this mechanism work so effectively? Esteem. One reason is that it taps into a deeply human instinct, the desire to be accurate, to be correct, to align with reality. Esteem. Most people are naturally inclined to question themselves when confronted with someone who speaks confidently, asserts authority, and frames the conversation as a quest for truth. Esteem. The narcissist exploits this inclination. They don't need to coerce you with threats. They simply manipulate your need for internal consistency. You start to align your perception with theirs, esteem. Not because you're convinced by evidence, but because the social and emotional pressure to conform becomes overwhelming. This mechanism also thrives on subtlety and repetition, esteem. One phrase might not seem powerful, but repeated phrases, repeated patterns, repeated interactions slowly cement the narcissist's control over time, esteem. You may notice yourself second-guessing decisions, questioning memories, or hesitating to act on your instincts. What once felt natural, trusting your judgment, expressing your opinion, esteem, starts to feel risky or wrong. And all of this happens without dramatic confrontation. It's a quiet, insidious shaping of your internal world, esteem, a control that feels invisible until you step back and look at the cumulative effect. And here's a critical insight: the narcissist's goal isn't just to make you doubt yourself temporarily, esteem. They want to create a state of ongoing compliance. They want you to rely on them to interpret reality. They want you to come to them for validation, for reassurance, for permission, esteem, for guidance, even in areas where you were once confident. And the phrase we've been discussing is a key tool in that process. It's the first hook that draws you in, esteem. The first step in establishing a hierarchy where they are the authority and you are the one who must adjust to their worldview. But it's not just intellectual, it's emotional, too, esteem. Narcissists are masters of tying control to feelings of guilt, shame, or inadequacy. When they use a phrase designed to invalidate your perception, it doesn't just challenge your thoughts, esteem. It triggers an emotional response. You might feel embarrassed, anxious, frustrated, or even apologetic. Those feelings are not random. They're the mechanism by which the control takes hold, esteem. By linking their words to your emotional response, the narcissist strengthens the internalization of their authority. You don't just doubt your thoughts, you doubt your feelings, esteem, which makes it harder to separate yourself from their influence. This is why it's so crucial to recognize the control mechanism for what it is, esteem. Awareness is the first step toward disrupting it. Once you understand that the phrase is not just a casual comment, but a strategic tool designed to shape your perception and behavior, esteem, you can begin to intervene. You can pause before internalizing, before apologizing, before adjusting your reality to match theirs. You can create mental and emotional space to reflect, esteem, rather than react. And that space is your power. It's also important to remember that the narcissist's control relies heavily on secrecy and subtlety. The phrase alone is not overtly abusive, esteem. It can be said in front of friends, in public, or in private, and yet it carries the hidden weight of authority. That's why narcissistic control is often invisible to outsiders. Friends, esteem, family, or colleagues might hear the same words and think, that's not a big deal, while the person experiencing the manipulation feels a creeping erosion of confidence, esteem. Recognizing this discrepancy is critical. It's not about convincing anyone else. It's about recognizing the dynamic for yourself and protecting your internal world, esteem. Another layer of this mechanism is the social reinforcement that often accompanies it. Narcissists are skilled at framing interactions so that you appear unreasonable if you challenge them, esteem. If you voice disagreement, they may spin it as overreaction, defensiveness, or emotional instability. This social framing reinforces the hierarchy they've established, esteem. You start to feel isolated, not because anyone is literally isolating you, but because your internal experience has been shifted to align with their narrative. You question yourself, esteem, and that internal questioning creates a subtle, yet powerful social withdrawal. And yet, despite all this complexity, the antidote is surprisingly simple: recognition and boundary setting, esteem. Once you identify the phrase as a control mechanism, once you understand how it is designed to shape your perception, you can take steps to protect your reality, esteem. You don't need to argue or prove a point. You simply acknowledge the attempt at control, observe your internal reaction, and refuse to let it dictate your feelings, thoughts, or actions, esteem. That mental clarity is where freedom begins. It's also essential to practice compassion toward yourself. Recognize that being affected by the phrase does not mean you are weak, esteem, it means you are human. Narcissists are skilled at targeting normal human instincts, trust, empathy, desire for connection, and using them to gain influence, esteem. Understanding that the manipulation is about their behavior, not your character, allows you to respond from a place of strength rather than shame, esteem. Awareness and self-compassion together form a powerful defense against the control mechanism. And finally, understanding this control mechanism isn't just about surviving one interaction, esteem. It's about reclaiming your autonomy over the long term. Every time you notice the pattern, every time you pause before internalizing, esteem. Every time you maintain your reality against their subtle influence, you weaken the hold they have. The more conscious you become of how their words function, the less power they carry, esteem. And that's the ultimate goal: to step out of the web of influence, to trust your instincts, and to live in your own reality without constant internal negotiation with someone else's agenda, esteem. So, the core truth I want you to take away from this part of our conversation is this: the phrase you hear is never just a phrase, esteem. It's a calculated lever designed to position the narcissist as the authority over your reality. It's quiet, it's subtle, and it can be devastating if left unchecked. But awareness, esteem, mental space, and self-compassion allow you to neutralize it, recognize it, understand it, observe your internal response, and then choose your next step intentionally, not reactively, esteem. That is how you take back control, reclaim your mind, and refuse to be quietly dominated. The hidden control mechanism works only if you let it. Once you see it for what it is, esteem, you take away its power, and that, my friends, is where true freedom begins. 2. If you want, I can expand key point 4 next, esteem. Continuing the speech seamlessly to focus on why empathetic people are particularly vulnerable, building the full motivational arc of awareness, insight, and empowerment. Esteem, do you want me to? Absolutely. Here's a fully expanded, natural flowing 1,500-word version of key point 4 for your speech. Now, esteem, let's explore a part of this dynamic that is often overlooked, but is critically important to understand. Because while that phrase is dangerous and the control mechanism is powerful, esteem, not everyone responds to it in the same way. Some people barely flinch when they hear it, while others are deeply affected, esteem. And one of the most striking patterns we see is that empathetic people, those who feel deeply, who care genuinely about others, who value harmony and understanding, esteem, are often the most vulnerable to this kind of manipulation. This isn't a weakness, and it's not a flaw. It's a natural human trait. But in the hands of a narcissist, esteem, empathy can become a pathway to control if you're not careful. Empathy, in its purest form, is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person, esteem. It's what makes us compassionate, responsive, and socially connected. But narcissists have a unique way of exploiting this strength, esteem. They rely on the fact that empathetic people are motivated by concern for others. They are motivated by the desire to maintain relationships, to avoid conflict, esteem, and to protect the emotional well-being of the people around them. When a narcissist delivers that deceptively simple phrase, esteem, something that undermines your perception or makes you question yourself, they are counting on your empathy to respond in a way that benefits them. Think about it. Esteem, if you are naturally empathetic, your first instinct when someone challenges your perception is not to fight. It's to pause, to consider their feelings, esteem, to adjust your behavior to avoid causing distress. You're wired to care. You're wired to find common ground. And narcissists know this instinct exists. They know that you will, by default, esteem. Try to maintain connection, to de-escalate tension, to rationalize their behavior. That instinct, which is a beautiful human quality in healthy contexts, esteem, becomes a vulnerability when someone's intention is manipulation, not mutual understanding. Empathy makes it difficult to recognize manipulation immediately. You might hear the phrase, esteem, feel a pang of doubt, and then immediately think, maybe I am overreacting. Maybe I need to give them the benefit of the doubt. That's not just natural, it's what empathy encourages, esteem. You are trying to accommodate, to understand, to see the situation from the other person's perspective. But the narcissist has already anticipated this response. That moment of hesitation, esteem, that pause to consider their feelings, is exactly when the control begins to take root. And it's not just the initial reaction that's affected. Empathetic people often spend hours, even days, esteem, replaying interactions in their minds, wondering if they've misinterpreted something, worrying that they hurt someone, or questioning whether their feelings are valid, esteem. That's cognitive empathy at work, thinking deeply about the mental and emotional states of others. But when a narcissist has inserted a manipulative phrase into that equation, esteem, that very empathy amplifies self-doubt. It turns reflection into rumination and care into internalized guilt. You're not just second-guessing the event, you're questioning your own value, esteem, your own judgment, and your own emotional reality. What's remarkable is how predictable this pattern becomes. Narcissists intuitively, or sometimes deliberately, esteem, identify empathetic individuals because they know these people will self-regulate, esteem. They know that empathetic people will try to adjust their own behavior rather than confront the source of manipulation. They know that when an empathetic person is challenged, esteem, their first response will often be internal rather than external. And that makes empathy an ideal gateway for the narcissist's control. The more you care about the other person, esteem, the more likely you are to internalize their subtle manipulations, and the more effectively they can shape your behavior without ever raising their voice or making a threat, esteem. Empathy also interacts with other human tendencies that narcissists exploit. Many empathetic people are conflict-averse. They prefer harmony and often avoid confrontation, esteem. They may fear upsetting others or creating tension, and narcissists are skilled at weaponizing that desire for peace. When a narcissist delivers a manipulative phrase, esteem, you might immediately suppress your feelings to avoid conflict, tell yourself you're overreacting, or even apologize for having a valid emotional response. Over time, esteem, this pattern erodes confidence and autonomy because your internal compass starts to defer to the narcissist's cues rather than your own judgment, esteem. And here's something that often surprises people: empathetic individuals are not just affected in the moment, they are affected over the long term, esteem. Because empathy drives reflection and introspection, you may replay the narcissist's words again and again, trying to understand them, trying to rationalize, esteem, trying to find a reason that justifies your own doubt. Every replay reinforces the narcissist's control, even if subtly. You're working hard to understand, esteem. But the understanding is skewed toward maintaining the narcissist's authority rather than reclaiming your own perspective. Empathy, when manipulated, esteem, becomes a tool that strengthens the very influence you're trying to resist. Another reason empathetic people are particularly vulnerable is that they tend to forgive and rationalize, esteem. Empathy fosters compassion, which makes you willing to consider that the other person may not be acting intentionally, or that there's a reasonable explanation for their behavior, esteem. You might think, maybe they didn't mean it that way, or maybe I misunderstood. These thoughts are natural, and they reflect the very best of human social intelligence, esteem. But narcissists rely on these tendencies to mask their manipulation, making the phrase seem reasonable, fair, or even caring. You start to give them the benefit of the doubt repeatedly, esteem, and each repetition chips away at your confidence and self-trust. It's also worth noting that empathy often goes hand in hand with high sensitivity. If you are attuned to emotional nuances, esteem, tone of voice, body language, micro-expressions, you may notice discrepancies that others overlook. While this is generally a strength in the context of a narcissist, esteem, it becomes a double-edged sword. You detect subtle cues, but the narcissist is already one step ahead, framing the narrative so that any observation you make can be twisted or dismissed. Esteem. Your awareness and sensitivity make you acutely conscious of the interaction, but the interpretation is skewed toward their control. That can be emotionally exhausting, confusing, esteem, and disorienting, leaving you questioning yourself more than the manipulator. And yet, there's a critical distinction here. Empathy is not the problem. Empathy is a strength, esteem, and it can be a shield rather than a vulnerability once it's paired with awareness and self-trust, esteem. The challenge is learning how to hold empathy without allowing it to override your perception of reality. You can care deeply about someone and still maintain your own boundaries, esteem. You can be attuned to their feelings without internalizing their manipulations. That balance is the key. Empathy doesn't mean compliance. Sensitivity doesn't mean vulnerability, esteem. Awareness and boundary setting allow you to channel your natural traits into resilience rather than exploitation. Here's where practical insight comes in, esteem. The empathetic person needs to develop what we call discernment. Discernment is the ability to recognize when empathy is being engaged authentically and when it's being weaponized, esteem. It's the skill of asking yourself, is this person's behavior meant to foster understanding, or is it designed to control me? And this is not always obvious, especially at first, esteem. Narcissists are subtle, and the phrases they use are often socially acceptable on the surface. But with discernment, you can detect the underlying pattern: repeated invalidation, esteem, repeated doubt, repeated internalization. That's the signal that your empathy is being exploited. Another layer to consider is the social and cultural context in which empathy operates. Esteem. Many societies and families reinforce the idea that caring, accommodating, and conflict-avoidant behavior is virtuous. Esteem. That means empathetic individuals often feel a moral imperative to prioritize others, sometimes even at the expense of their own mental and emotional health. Esteem. Narcissists exploit this perfectly. They rely on the socially reinforced tendency to please, to maintain harmony, esteem, and to avoid rocking the boat. And when these tendencies intersect with the manipulative phrase we've been discussing, the result is a quiet esteem. Insidious control that can feel almost inevitable unless it is consciously challenged. And here's the hopeful truth: once you understand this dynamic, esteem, you can protect yourself without losing your empathy. You don't have to harden yourself, become cold, or shut down your emotions. What you do need is awareness, clarity, esteem, and assertive boundaries. Recognize when a phrase is intended to manipulate, notice the internal self-doubt it triggers, and consciously choose how to respond. Esteem. You can still be compassionate and caring, but you can also refuse to internalize manipulation or surrender your reality. That combination, empathy plus discernment, esteem, is a formidable shield against control. Empathetic people have an incredible capacity for insight, compassion, and connection. Those same traits can be exploited, esteem, but they can also be the foundation for resilience. Once you see the pattern, once you understand how narcissists rely on empathy to maintain control, you gain a critical advantage, esteem. You learn to respond intentionally rather than reactively. You reclaim your internal authority while still honoring your capacity to care. That's not just survival, it's empowerment. So, esteem. The takeaway from this section is clear: your empathy is not a flaw, it is your strength. But it must be paired with awareness and boundaries. Narcissists are skilled at exploiting caring, esteem, sensitive individuals precisely because those traits are admirable in healthy relationships. Awareness allows you to maintain your integrity, protect your reality, and respond with clarity, esteem. Rather than being swept along by manipulation, you can care, you can connect, and you can still refuse control. That is the path to true emotional sovereignty, esteem. And here's the closing truth I want you to hold on to: being empathetic does not mean being powerless. Caring deeply does not obligate you to surrender your reality. Awareness, discernment, esteem, and boundaries transform your natural empathy into a source of strength, not vulnerability. Once you recognize how your empathy can be targeted, esteem, you gain the power to protect yourself and still engage authentically in the world. That awareness is where freedom begins and where the narcissist's subtle control ends. If you want, esteem. I can now expand key point 5 for the next, focusing on the long-term impact of ignoring the red flags in the same seamless, motivational, conversational style, esteem. This will continue the speech toward its climax of awareness and empowerment. Do you want me to continue with that? Absolutely. Here's a fully expanded, natural, flowing 1,500-word version of this key point 5 for your speech. Now that we've talked about the phrase itself, the self-doubt it triggers, esteem, the control mechanism it conceals, and why empathetic people are particularly vulnerable, we need to take a step back and consider the long-term impact of ignoring this red flag, esteem. Because here's the hard truth: when you repeatedly hear that phrase and allow it to influence your thoughts, feelings, or behavior, the consequences accumulate slowly and silently. Esteem, and the danger is not always immediate. It's cumulative. It's like a slow erosion, bit by bit, until you may barely recognize yourself or your life. Esteem. Imagine for a moment what happens if you hear this phrase once or twice, shrug it off, and then don't think much about it. That may seem harmless, right? Esteem. But what happens when it's repeated over weeks, months, or years? You may not notice the change at first because it happens in increments. Each time you hesitate, esteem. Each time you question yourself, each time you suppress your feelings to avoid conflict, the narcissist gains another small victory. And the trick is, those victories add up. Over time, esteem. Your internal compass, the instinctive sense of what feels right, can become distorted. You start to rely on the narcissist to interpret reality for you, instead of trusting yourself. Esteem. This cumulative effect has a profound impact on your self-esteem. The more you internalize the message that your feelings, perceptions, esteem, or instincts are wrong or overreacting, the more you begin to doubt your own judgment. You might start to question your decisions, your memory, even your value as a person. Esteem. That's because narcissistic manipulation doesn't just affect the moment, it reshapes your self-concept over time. What once felt like confidence can slowly be replaced by uncertainty. Esteem. What once felt like clarity can be replaced by confusion. And that self-doubt is exactly what the narcissist wants. It keeps you compliant, anxious, and easier to influence. Esteem. But it doesn't stop at self-esteem. Emotional exhaustion is another long-term impact that many people underestimate. Esteem. When you're constantly adjusting yourself to accommodate someone else's manipulations, it takes a toll. You may feel drained after conversations, anxious about interactions, esteem, or perpetually waiting for the next subtle jab. That exhaustion is not just psychological, it manifests physically. Sleep may be disrupted, appetite affected, energy depleted. Esteem. Your body starts to mirror the stress your mind is under. And because the manipulations are subtle and often socially acceptable on the surface, esteem, it's easy to dismiss the source of the exhaustion as just life or just stress, rather than recognizing it as the direct effect of repeated emotional control. Esteem. Another long-term consequence is erosion of trust, both in yourself and in others. When a narcissist consistently invalidates your perceptions or emotions, esteem, you may start to question your ability to read situations accurately. You may doubt whether you can trust your own judgment in personal or professional contexts. And over time, esteem. This self-doubt can generalize to other relationships. You might hesitate to rely on colleagues, friends, or even family members, esteem, because the internalized patterns of questioning yourself spill over. You've been trained to second guess, and that second guessing can feel like a default setting, esteem, long after the immediate interaction has ended. Then there's the impact on your identity, esteem. Repeated exposure to manipulative phrases and controlling dynamics can slowly shape who you feel you are. When your internal narrative is constantly being rewritten by someone else, esteem, your sense of self can become fragmented. You may start to act in ways that are inconsistent with your values or desires just to avoid conflict, to gain approval, or to prevent invalidation, esteem. Over time, these adjustments add up. The person you see in the mirror may no longer feel like the person you know yourself to be, esteem. And that gap between your authentic self and the version molded by manipulation creates emotional strain and confusion, leaving you disconnected from your own identity, esteem. There's also the risk of normalization. When manipulative behaviors are repeated over time, it can feel normal, so normal that you begin to dismiss your own discomfort. You might think, esteem. This is just how relationships work, or everyone has disagreements like this. That normalization is incredibly dangerous because it allows the cycle to continue without interruption. Esteem. The narcissist benefits from your adaptation, they gain power from your acceptance. And the longer the pattern continues, the harder it becomes to break free, esteem, because you've been conditioned to accept behaviors that should be red flags. Another long-term impact is the erosion of your boundaries, esteem. Every time you internalize a phrase that undermines your perception, every time you hesitate to speak up, every time you adjust to maintain peace, esteem, you are effectively eroding your personal boundaries. Boundaries are not just rules for others, they are the line between your reality and someone else's influence, esteem. When they are compromised repeatedly, it becomes harder to assert yourself, esteem. You may start to accept behavior that is hurtful or controlling because the boundary that would normally protect you has been weakened over time, esteem. And this brings us to the emotional consequences: anxiety, guilt, shame. These feelings are often the most insidious because they don't always make sense in context, esteem. You might feel anxious about expressing a simple opinion, guilty for wanting your own needs met, or ashamed for reacting naturally to situations, esteem. These emotions are not evidence that you are flawed. They are the cumulative effect of repeated manipulation and control. Over time, they can lead to chronic stress, depression, esteem, and a sense of powerlessness. And when that happens, it becomes even harder to break the cycle without conscious intervention. There's also a social dimension to consider: esteem. When your confidence and boundaries are eroded, your interactions with others are affected. You may avoid asserting yourself with colleagues, friends, esteem, or family because you've internalized the fear of being dismissed or invalidated. You may downplay your accomplishments, minimize your needs, or suppress your opinions to avoid conflict, esteem. And as your social sphere contracts, your sense of support and connection can diminish, which ironically makes you more dependent on the very person whose manipulation is causing the harm, esteem. This is how control extends beyond the immediate relationship into multiple facets of your life. And let's not underestimate the long-term cognitive effects, esteem. Chronic exposure to manipulative phrases can distort thinking patterns. You may develop a tendency to overanalyze, constantly review interactions for hidden meanings, esteem, or anticipate manipulation in situations where none exists. While vigilance can be protective in certain contexts, excessive internalization can create mental fatigue and decision paralysis, esteem. You start to doubt your instincts across the board, which erodes your ability to act confidently and assertively. And that hesitation can feel paralyzing, esteem, leaving you stuck in cycles of indecision and self-doubt. But here's the critical insight: the long-term impact is not inevitable. Awareness, recognition, esteem, and early action can interrupt the cycle before the erosion becomes severe. The moment you identify the manipulative phrase, the moment you notice its effect on your thoughts and feelings, esteem, you can choose a different response. You can step back, establish or reinforce your boundaries, and refuse to internalize the manipulation. You can reclaim your perception, your confidence, esteem, and your sense of reality. Intervention may feel uncomfortable at first, but it is the key to preventing the slow, cumulative effects of control from taking hold, esteem. The long-term impact also highlights why self-care is essential in these situations. Protecting your mental, emotional, and physical well-being is not indulgent, it's necessary, esteem. You need to actively replenish your energy, validate your feelings, and reconnect with your sense of self outside the influence of the narcissist, esteem. This might mean seeking support from trusted friends, engaging in therapy, journaling, or practicing mindfulness, esteem. Each act of self-care reinforces your boundaries and strengthens your resilience against ongoing manipulation. And remember, the stakes are not trivial, esteem. Ignoring the red flags doesn't just affect how you feel day to day, it affects your trajectory, your career decisions, your social relationships, your ability to trust, your sense of self-worth. All of these can be subtly but powerfully influenced over time if you allow repeated manipulation to go unchecked. That's why this is so important, esteem. The cost of inaction is not immediate, but it is cumulative, and it can reshape your life in ways you may not anticipate until the patterns are deeply entrenched. So, esteem. What's the takeaway from this long-term perspective? It's simple, but profound. Early recognition and decisive action are essential. When you hear the phrase, don't dismiss it, esteem, don't rationalize it. Pay attention to how it affects you and respond with clarity, boundaries, and self-trust. The sooner you intervene, esteem, the less opportunity the narcissist has to erode your confidence, distort your reality, or compromise your boundaries. And the more consistently you maintain your awareness, esteem, the stronger your sense of self becomes. That is how you protect not just your moment-to-moment well-being, but your long-term emotional and psychological health. And finally, esteem. Here's the essential truth I want you to hold on to: the impact of ignoring a red flag is cumulative, silent, and powerful, but so is your capacity to interrupt it. Every act of awareness, esteem, every boundary you enforce, every step you take to protect your internal reality is a step toward reclaiming control over your life. The long-term effects of manipulation are real, esteem, but they are not inevitable. With insight, courage, and consistent action, you can prevent the erosion, preserve your sense of self, and refuse to be defined by the narcissist's agenda. Esteem. Awareness is the antidote. Action is the shield, and choosing to protect yourself is the ultimate act of empowerment. If you want, I can now expand key point 6 errors, esteem. Focusing on what to do the moment you hear the phrase, tying all the earlier points together into a strong, actionable, motivational conclusion for the speech, esteem. This will complete the full arc from awareness to empowerment. Do you want me to do that next? Absolutely. Here's a fully expanded, esteem, natural, flowing 1,500-word version of key point 6x for your speech, completing the full arc of awareness, insight, and empowerment, esteem. Now we arrive at the moment everyone dreads yet must master the moment you hear that phrase, that single, deceptively innocent line, the one that triggers doubt, hesitation, esteem, and self-questioning is where everything converges. If you've listened closely to the patterns we've discussed, you understand that it's not just a phrase. It's a manipulative tool, esteem, a lever of control, and a silent signal that the narcissist is attempting to shape your perception, your emotions, and your behavior, esteem. How you respond in that instant can determine whether you maintain your autonomy or start a slow slide into self-doubt and compliance. The first and most critical step is recognition, esteem. Awareness is your greatest ally in this dynamic. You need to hear the words, feel the subtle tug on your confidence, and immediately identify them for what they are and attempt to control, esteem. That recognition is what prevents the manipulation from taking root. Without it, the narcissist's strategy works silently in the background, planting seeds of doubt that grow over time, esteem. Recognition doesn't mean confrontation or aggression. It simply means acknowledging that this is a deliberate pattern, not a casual remark. Once you name it, you reclaim your perspective, esteem. Next comes emotional regulation. The moment that phrase hits, it's natural to feel a flash of anger, frustration, confusion, or even guilt. Those reactions are normal and valid, esteem. The key is not to act impulsively on them in the heat of the moment. Narcissists thrive on reactive responses. When you respond impulsively, defending, justifying, arguing, esteem, or trying to win, the interaction, you are feeding the control dynamic. Instead, you must pause, take a breath, and create a mental buffer, esteem. That brief space allows you to respond consciously rather than react unconsciously. It's in that space that empowerment begins, esteem. Once you've recognized the manipulation and taken a moment to regulate your emotional response, the next step is to reaffirm your reality. Remind yourself that your perception is valid, esteem. Your feelings are valid. Your experience is real. Narcissists try to overwrite your internal compass, making you doubt your own instincts. This is why internal affirmation is so powerful, esteem. It's a quiet but firm way of drawing a boundary inside your own mind. You don't need to argue with the narcissist or convince them that you're right, esteem. You simply reinforce your own awareness of the truth. You are entitled to your feelings, your instincts, and your perspective. Then comes setting boundaries, clearly, consistently, esteem, and without apology. Boundaries are not optional. They are essential to preserving your autonomy. This may mean asserting yourself verbally, physically, or emotionally, esteem, depending on the situation. It could be as simple as saying, "I hear what you're saying, esteem, but my perspective is different," or "I'm not comfortable continuing this conversation under that tone." Boundaries are not about confrontation, they're about protecting your internal reality, esteem. And when enforced calmly and consistently, they communicate that you will not allow manipulation to dictate your behavior. Another vital step is choosing when to disengage, esteem. Narcissists often escalate when they sense resistance, and that escalation can be designed to provoke you into reacting emotionally. In these moments, strategic disengagement is not cowardice, esteem, it's a protective act. It can mean walking away from the conversation, pausing the interaction, or redirecting attention to neutral ground, esteem. Disengagement is a signal that you are in control of your response and that the narcissist's manipulative tactics will not dictate the terms of engagement, esteem. Choosing to disengage is an act of self-preservation, and it's a statement of your authority over your own mind. Documentation and reflection also play a critical role, esteem. After encountering a manipulative phrase, it can be incredibly useful to document the interaction, write down exactly what was said, how it made you feel, esteem, and any internal responses you noticed. Over time, patterns will emerge. This isn't about proving the narcissist wrong, esteem. It's about training your awareness and reinforcing your memory and perception. Reflection helps you see the recurring tactics and prepares you for future encounters, esteem. It is an ongoing exercise in reclaiming clarity and resisting subtle manipulation. Support is another cornerstone of response. Isolation amplifies the narcissist's influence, esteem. Discussing your experience with trusted friends, family, or a therapist provides perspective and validation, esteem. These external checks help counteract the internalized self-doubt that narcissists cultivate, esteem. Knowing that your perceptions are affirmed by reality outside the narcissist's sphere is empowering, esteem. It reinforces your internal boundaries and strengthens your confidence to respond intentionally rather than reactively, esteem. It's also important to recognize the difference between accountability and manipulation. Narcissists often frame their controlling phrases as constructive criticism, guidance, or concern, esteem. They may say, "I'm only trying to help," or "you need to see it this way." While constructive feedback is valuable in healthy relationships, esteem. Manipulation masks itself under the guise of concern. The test is not what they can say almost anything, but the effect it has on you. Does it provoke self-doubt, silence, esteem, or internalized guilt? If so, it's manipulation. Recognizing this distinction helps you respond appropriately without giving away your autonomy. Esteem, empathy, and self-compassion are equally critical in this moment. Recognize that being affected by manipulation does not make you weak. It makes you human. Esteem. It's natural to feel unsettled or question yourself momentarily. The key is not to let the feeling dominate your response. Self-compassion provides a buffer, esteem, allowing you to acknowledge the emotional impact without surrendering control. Empathy directed toward yourself ensures that you honor your own experiences and instincts, esteem reinforcing your internal authority and resilience. Another aspect to consider is the long-term mental rehearsal. Before entering situations where manipulative phrases are likely, esteem, mentally prepare, anticipate the phrase, visualize yourself recognizing it, pausing, affirming your reality, and setting your boundary. This preparation may feel simple, esteem, but it's profoundly effective. Rehearsal strengthens your ability to respond in real time with clarity and confidence, rather than falling into habitual self-doubt. Esteem. Think of it as training for your mind, arming yourself to encounter manipulation without losing your footing. Over time, esteem. Consistently responding in these ways creates what I like to call a resilience loop. Recognition, regulation, affirmation, boundary setting, disengagement, documentation, support, esteem, and rehearsal work together to protect your internal reality and weaken the narcissist's influence. Each conscious response chips away at the power of their manipulative phrase, esteem, gradually shifting the dynamic from one of control to one of personal empowerment. This is the cumulative effect of intentional, strategic action in the face of manipulation. Esteem. It's also worth noting that this process is iterative. You will not always respond perfectly, and the narcissist may test your boundaries repeatedly. That's normal. The goal is progress, esteem, not perfection. Every moment you notice manipulation and respond intentionally strengthens your internal authority. Every act of clarity reinforces the fact that your perception is valid, esteem, that your feelings are real, and that your mind belongs to you. Over time, these small acts of resistance create a profound shift in your relationship with yourself and with the narcissist, esteem. And here's an important truth: the moment you respond with awareness and boundaries, the narcissist loses the leverage that phrase was designed to create, esteem. Their quiet control evaporates because it only functions when you internalize self-doubt. By pausing, affirming, and protecting your reality, you neutralize the manipulative intent, esteem. You reclaim the power that was being quietly siphoned away, and you reassert ownership of your emotional and mental space. That is the ultimate victory. Finally, esteem, it is critical to integrate these practices into your daily life, not just in moments of acute interaction. Esteem, repeated exposure to manipulative phrases and controlling tactics requires ongoing vigilance. Awareness, boundary setting, and internal affirmation must become habitual. Esteem. This is how you shift from a reactive state, where the narcissist phrase triggers doubt, to a proactive state, where your perception, confidence, and autonomy are anchored. Over time, esteem, this builds resilience, fortifies your self-trust, and diminishes the narcissist's capacity to control you. So, when you hear the phrase, do not panic, do not internalize it, recognize it. Esteem, regulate your emotions, affirm your reality, enforce your boundaries, disengage strategically if needed, document and reflect, seek support, rehearse for future encounters, esteem, and practice empathy toward yourself. Each step is an act of reclaiming your autonomy. Each step chips away at the narcissist's silent power. Each step reinforces your clarity, confidence, esteem, and control. And here is the closing truth: I want to leave you with the power to respond intentionally, to reclaim your reality, and to resist manipulation lies entirely within you. Esteem. The phrase may be designed to control, but it only works if you let it. Awareness, boundaries, and self-trust are your armor. Courage, clarity, and persistence are your weapons. Esteem. When you hear it, you do not have to run blindly or surrender silently. You can stand firm, protect your mind, and assert your truth. That is the ultimate act of empowerment, esteem, and the moment when freedom truly begins. If you want, I can now compile all 6 key points into a single seamless speech with natural transitions, a strong opening, esteem, and a powerful conclusion, ready for delivery as a 100-minute motivational talk in Dr. Ramani's style. This will give you the complete speech, fully aligned and polished. Esteem. Do you want me to do that? Do you want me to continue with that?